What up, beautiful watchers? I am the Dom, and this is my beginner's guide to the Watchmen universe. As this is quite clearly going to be spoilerific, I would advise avoiding this if you have any interest in reading this particular graphic novel in the near future. Okay, for those of you still with me, on a fundamental level, what you're looking at is a parallel universe that diverged from our reality's history around the late 1930s. The story's set in October 1985, which is around when the novel was published, but you get a pretty clear idea of the events of the preceding decades through multiple references and flashbacks. Many significant 20th century events happened in much the same way, or at least started in the same way, but in this universe the existence of superheroes resulted in some major changes in the results of said events. The first upsurgence of vigilante heroing took place in the late 30s, early 40s when a group of men and women started donning masks and costumes in order to anonymously fight crime. Eventually they joined forces, naming themselves the Minutemen. They quickly became very popular in the media for their exploits, and even though some of them came to rather unfortunate ends, on the whole they were a rather successful group. In the 60s and 70s, a new, younger generation started taking up the superhero mantle under the name of the Watchmen. But at this point, public opinion had started to turn against them. The police force, tired of years of undisciplined interference and law enforcement taking all the glory, went on strike, and the vigilantes found that they lacked the numbers and the experience to keep the peace in their absence. In light of these developments, the president made being a costumed crime fighter once again a criminal offense, and almost all of the Watchmen hung up their capes forever. The most noteworthy of the Watchmen are as follows. Daniel Dreiberg, aka Night Owl, this world's incarnation of Batman. Sort of. He's actually primarily based on a slightly lesser known hero, Blue Beetle, but speaking from my own layman's perspective, he's a rich guy who's taken on a nocturnal flying sonar using animal as his logo and bases both his costume and his vehicle on it, and has a cave full of high-tech gadgets. Combine that within the film him using his cape as a glider and you quite clearly have some Batman in there too. Either way, he was a huge fanboy of Hollis Mason, the original 40s Night Owl, and took up the mantle after he retired. Walter Kovacs, aka Rorschach, named as such because the ever-changing shapes on his mask resemble a Rorschach test. Oddly enough, I've always thought of him as another Batman-esque character, but this time it's the version that was the dark loner that doesn't get on with the rest of the team, lives in the shadows, and is generally considered to be just as bad as the criminals he fights. Laura Uzpechik, aka Silk Spectre, the daughter of one of the original Minutemen, she was forced into being a crime fighter pretty much against her will by her mother, who was desperate to relive her glory days vicariously through her. She's going through a bit of a midlife crisis in the novel, as she thinks she hasn't really done much of her life other than a short career she didn't like and being John's lover. Edward Blake, aka the Comedian, the only Minuteman to go on to become a Watchman. The Comedian is generally disliked by all, probably because his hobbies include rape, murder, political assassinations, and he's generally a dick to everyone he meets. It's often commented that he chose the Comedian motif because he has a greater understanding of the foulness of human nature, and turning everything he sees into a big joke was the only reasonable response. Adrianne Vedic, aka Ozymandias, the first of the new generation of Caped Crusaders. He's often described as being the smartest man in the world. After crime fighting becomes illegal, he smoothly transitions into being a highly successful entrepreneur businessman. Finally, you have John Osterman, aka Dr. Manhattan, the only superhero to actually have superpowers. John was a physicist who was accidentally disintegrated when a scientific experiment went wrong. However, he managed to put himself back together somehow and is now a sort of immortal, atomic-powered, glowing blue demigod capable of levitation, teleportation, telekinesis, and matter reorientation. Another interesting thing about him is his perception of time. He literally doesn't live in the present. He sees everything that has ever happened to him and ever will happen to him all at once simultaneously, and constantly witnesses the past, present, and future. This makes it difficult for him to interact with normal linear beings like humans. Despite this, he does still have a significant human side to him, as he still forms romantic attachments to women and can be shocked by disturbing events. Out of everyone, the two characters that have the most prominent effect on this alternative history are the Comedian and Dr. Manhattan. After being a masked vigilante is re-legalized, the Comedian becomes Richard Nixon's personal wetman. It's not ever proved, but it's implied heavily that he personally assassinated JFK at Nixon's behest and prevented the Watergate scandal from happening by murdering the two reporters that would have brought it to light. Dr. Manhattan's influence on Earth is less subtle, as you probably would expect from an all-powerful being. Already possessing a keen scientific mind before the accident, he now has the thinking power of a supercomputer and the powers to observe things on a microscopic level and perform advanced feats of engineering, all without the use of any tools or machines. As a result of this, technology in the Watchmen universe has jumped forward considerably, allowing for the invention of things like hover ships and electric cars. It's also intentionally made common knowledge that all forms of modern warfare would be completely ineffective against him, as he proves by single-handedly winning the Vietnam War for America at the behest of Richard Nixon. In theory, he would even be able to nullify a massive atomic attack, turning a salvo of WMDs into so much paper confetti with a wave wave of his hand. With the Americans now believing themselves to be invulnerable due to the protection of this super being, they take a much more aggressive approach to the Cold War, causing tensions with Russia to escalate to an even higher level than they did in reality. Capitalizing on these things, Nixon overrules the 22nd Amendment and allows himself to run for 5 terms in office. As far as the plot goes, it starts with a comedian getting thrown to his death out of a window. Rorschach investigates and believes there to be a mask killer on the loose and visits all the living former Watchmen in turn. No one really takes him seriously on account of him being a, psychopath, so he does some more digging on his own by roughing up some people in bars and visiting a former evil crime mastermind. Dr. Manhattan's and Silk Spectre's relationship turns out to have become a bit rocky over the years as she's become frustrated at his growing detachment to the human race. This culminates with her ending things and storming out. Rorschach gets framed for murder, arrested and unmasked. He's sent to prison and development that does nothing to dissuade his murderous tendencies. Dr. Manhattan is presented with shocking evidence that prolonged exposure to him may cause cancer in humans. This, combined with his recent breakup, is too much for him to handle, so he teleports himself to Mars for some alone time. With him gone, the USA suddenly finds itself without its atomic trump card and World War III becomes almost inevitable overnight. Around this time, someone takes a shot at Ozymandias but dies in the attempt because it turns out the guy is insanely fast and has sick mad skills. Meanwhile, Spectre is taken in by Night Owl, and after some time together, they decide to get their hero on again one last time for old time's sake. A nearby fire gives them a taste of the old glory days, and they like it so much they decide to spring Rorschach from prison and all team up to try to find out what the smeg has been going on recently. Just then, John turns up out of the blue, see what I did there, to pick up Spectre because his weird perception of time has shown him that he's shortly going to be having a conversation with her on Mars. Once they're there, they argue over whether he should intercede to save the world from devastation. Skipping some plot twists, she convinces him that the human race is worth saving. Back on Earth, Rorschach and Night Owl discover that Ozymandias is probably behind the whole thing, and they make their way to his hidden Antarctic base to confront him. What happens next is going to be the key point in my main review, so I won't spoil it here. Suffice to say that it turns out that Ozymandias' plan is to provide the world with a crisis so terrible and an enemy so terrifying it will unite all nations together to combat it and thus avoiding total devastation. A side effect of this is the death of millions of people, but he saw this as a small price to pay for saving the whole planet. Everything goes according to his plans. People die. A lot of them. Despite their shock and horror, everyone agrees that seeing as revealing the truth will result in the recommencement of World War III, they should probably keep their mouths shut about it, the only disconsenting opinion being Rorschach's. Finding that he won't budge on the issue, Dr. Manhattan is forced to kill him to stop the truth from coming out. After that, he decides he's going to go and start his own planet Earth in another galaxy far, far away, and it's going to have blackjack and hookers. Silk Spectre and Night Owl end up together and plan to start a new crime-fighting team. Ozzy is left to try to figure out if he saved the world or just senselessly committed genocide. The last plot point in the story shows that all of this might have been for nothing, as Rorschach's journal has been mailed to a newspaper and could expose the whole thing. It's left open-ended if this happens or not. In summary, Watchmen is unnecessarily dark, confusingly non-linear, extremely long, and freaking awesome! This is seriously my favourite graphic novel in the whole world, hence why I'm starting with it. Okay, go watch my Lost in adaptation for it now, go on. Shoo, shoo.